my brain, granted we knew each other when we were kids and we all listened to a completely different style of music. So I'm often curious to because I've changed my musical taste.
Yeah.
And I've talked about it quite a few times. I don't really listen to the music that we play anymore as a band, ever actually. But I enjoy it when I'm playing with the guys.
Yeah.
But I never turn it on unless it's like an old school banger or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, this is just gonna, get my feathers flowing. We're good. But
there's always a time for it.
So I want to take it back for a little bit because you were in Austin and you went to Atlanta and then you came back maybe a little bit defeated to Durango because I've done that. I've done that same crawl back.
Yeah, dude.
And in the moment, you do feel 100% defeated. You're like, I'm a fucking failure. I'm going home. But like what people tend to forget is this place is awesome.
Yes.
Like it truly is world class when it comes to a lot of things. Great people, great music, great food. We still aren't overly saturated by, the ski resort because we're not built around a ski resort. So we can still almost survive here.
Yeah.
It's questionable some days, but
yeah.
So I want to know a little bit more, if you don't mind, man. Is like, what led you to coming back here? I mean, was it like you needed to personally get away, like as far as growth, or your life was going in a direction that you were like no longer satisfied with?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that probably is it for sure. I mean, I moved to Atlanta with a girl, and that relationship just pretty much disintegrated as soon as we moved there. So I was kind of stuck there for the summer, just working and, saving up money to get back home. But I was like totally, I was done. I mentioned earlier, I was like, chefing and working in fine dining restaurants. And I had finally gotten out of that right before we moved to Atlanta, but I was working for Whole Foods as a butcher. So I was still kind of in the food scene, and I was working at this charcuterie, like specialty shop in Atlanta too. But I was done with it, man. I just like wanted to get out of the restaurant and food industry like so bad, but I had like no real direction, no real prospects. I love Atlanta still. I think it's a great city, but there just wasn't anything for me there to keep me there. And like I said, I kind of just like missed the West a little bit. I missed the mountains and I just needed to like reset, and that's what it was. And so I drove, and it was kind of a cathartic, experience coming back too. Like I bought myself a ticket to go see Farm Aid in Virginia 1 year. It was in 2016. It was like October. So I planned my whole like moving back to Colorado, in a moving van trip around, like popping up to Virginia to see this like epic Willie Nelson concert. And then I like drove west from there. Yeah. And I like stopped in Nashville for a night just to like see Nashville and then, but then got back to Colorado and pretty much instantly, got a DUI, and which like totally fucked things up even more than they already kind of were. But it was good, man. Long story short, like, I quit drinking, and that was like almost 6 years ago. And, I've been way more productive as a fucking human. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And, it's just, going back to what you were saying too about music and how we were both into, like, we were all really into hardcore, like really into that, like kind of emo, screamo, hardcore music and of the early 2000s, man. And I like remember it fondly. And you and I have been to many shows together. And I've seen you play a lot of shows back in those days. And like, but for me, bluegrass and like folk music and stuff was always kind of in the background of that. Like the hardcore music was like the cool music and Sublime and like all that shit, that and like all the cool, like Sage Francis and like Black Alicious and all those cool hip hop artists that we
It almost keeps you relevant.
Yeah. That was like
in the conversation.
Totally. That was like my friends and I's music, you know what I mean? And then, but a little bit of my dad's side of the family, like my dad and my uncle, are both musicians, and my uncle plays a lot of bluegrass. And so it was always in the background for me. And I started playing in bluegrass bands, in high school. And, but I took 10 years off pretty much. I didn't play music for like 10 years, man. Like
really?
At all. Like it just wasn't what I was doing. I didn't have time for it. I couldn't be in a band because I worked on weekends and nights, cooking.
Yeah.
So I was like, what's the point? Who even cares? Like, I just won't even play. So I just like didn't really play for like a decade. And that's why I really wanted to get back into it when I moved back too. So
yeah. I was just curious, like, you know, I made that statement about being in Texas and hearing that kind of music. And so at that juncture, you know, in Texas, I was really, really depressed for some reason. It wasn't COVID, had nothing. I was already depressed. I was running away from a huge failure that I had here with having to, you know, close down a company and, you know, file bankruptcy and had to lay off 27 guys. And so I was running as fast as I fucking could to get there. And the money I was making down there was really great. And it kind of masked it a little bit.
Yeah,
but
it wasn't like a Band-Aid on it.
It wasn't enough to like get the depression out of the head, you know, and I will never forget this moment. And I think I talked to this a couple times, but there was somebody turned me on to Ashley McBryde, and I was listening to, I forget what song it was. Either it was like driving and it was raining. It was horrible in Texas. And the song comes on and dude, I burst into fucking tears, dude. It just hit at such a visceral level. I pulled the work truck over and I just like sat there just like, what the fuck is wrong with me, dude? And the way that she sang that song, it was just different. I mean, yes, she's still very much a popular country artist, but she has that bluegrass element a little bit behind her. She's got that, you know, and I'm only naming like some of these higher artists because I don't know a lot of the, you know, a lot of the meat and potatoes of the actual industry that, you know, but you know, it was weird for me because it hit. And then my liking for that music changed almost overnight. It's all I started playing on guitar. It's all I wanted to learn. It's all I wanted to listen to. And so, but the reason I bring that up is because I feel like sometimes when you go through a change that's so drastic where you come back to something defeated and you have to kind of crawl out of that hole that you personally put yourself into, it's almost like you got to push all those shitty friends away. You also have to push the remembrance of that kind of style of music away, at least for me, because when I look at music, like I only listen to the old stuff that I love, and it takes me back to an instant moment. Like I'll never forget being at Warped Tour and watching Under Oath, and the freaking mosh pit dirt cloud is like towering above us, and like holding one of the Hoffman's younger brothers like up above because he had lost his shoes. I hear that song, and it's literally the title of the episode that Courtney and Tommy were on. That was the song playing. That's the moment that I remember. And so it's like, it's weird for me. Songs are great, music is great, but it's the moments that you remember out of those little nuances while listening to those songs. Yeah. And so for me, I was still so depressed. I had to kind of like I felt coming back to it months and months later, like, why am I only listening to this? Because I really love it. I still love it. But I felt like I had to push all those old memories away to almost escape further from and get further into my depression. And then that music, like, I remember it was so crazy. So when we first moved down there, Simone, I had to work. I was working a ton.
Yeah, just like only working. Yeah.
So Simone took the kids home for Christmas. The first Christmas was there. They were there Christmas morning to open presents. It was crazy. I was riding one of Jonah's like scooters in the house. I had the flu. I slipped off. I broke 3 of my toes. And it was like
Such
out of nowhere, like what is going on? But they were leaving. They were leaving at like 15 minutes after we opened presents.
Oh my God.
And so they were gone for 2 weeks, and I was in this house alone. It was cold. I was working, and I was sad as fuck. Right? And I started just playing this music. And so a buddy of mine calls me. He's like, "What are you doing?" And he lived in Corpus Christi, but he was coming up to Green Hall. And so I'm like, "Yeah, I'm at the house alone." He's like, "No, come down to Green Hall, dude." I was like, "Well, who's playing?" He's like, "I got a ticket for you. Just come down. I know it's a guy you like. We've talked about it." I'm like, who the fuck's playing?
Sweet.
Right? And so it was an impromptu show, and I show up, and it's William Clark Green.
Sick, dude.
And Flatland Cavalry's opening up for him. And I'm like, so like, I was in this misery state, and then I went and watched them play. They played their live album front to back because they had just released it.
Yeah.
And I was like, fuck, dude, I love this music so much. It has so much more contextual depth than the stuff we listened to for years. And not saying that like tech guitar stuff and that is beautiful in its own right.
Yeah, totally.
But like the style of music that I love anymore, it has so much more dynamic range. Yeah. And if that doesn't make sense to the listener, like dynamic range is like top to bottom, right? Like you can hear something purposely crescendo and come back up into and out of it. It's almost like a waltz with the music, right? And
when we were kids, it was just like as loud as fuck all the time.
compressed all up here, you know. But so my question to go back to it is like, you did have a past with the bluegrass element, but do you feel like you pushed yourself into it almost purposefully, or?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, you know, wanting to just actively play more was a big part of it. And I had zero aspirations to like do this for a living. Like when I got back and was like picking up the guitar again and the mandolin again and stuff and playing bass again, I just wanted to like have fun with music. But yeah, you know, I think what it was, you know, I think there's a similarity to kind of what you're saying too, because I don't really go back and listen to, you know, those bands that we used to listen to, like Circa and you know, Coheed and Cambria was always like one of my favorites, but very sparingly, because the same thing, it takes me back to when we were kids and stuff. And I feel like after all this, you know, transformative shit went down in my life, I kind of got into, I got really into old time music and like fiddle music, which has kind of got me into playing a lot of old time banjo and old time fiddle, as well as playing bass in the band. So I think that's totally like a parallel to kind of what you're saying, because it was all around that same time when like shit was just hitting the fan, and you know, and it kind of like took me in a different direction. So